As the storm raged outside, the mansion stood silent, its cold, imposing walls hiding the dark secrets within. James Ward had been absent for far too long, hiding behind his success, while his son Liam was left to face horrors alone. He hadn't expected the scene that awaited him when he returned tonight, his son trembling in fear, begging for mercy from a woman he once trusted. "Please, don't hurt me. Don't hurt my brother anymore." Those words tore through the air, and in that moment James knew the family he had failed to protect had been shattered beyond repair. Before we dive into the story, leave a comment below and let me know which city you are watching from. Let's get started. The storm had been raging for hours, the wind howling through the trees like a desperate forgotten ghost, while the waves crashed violently against the jagged rocks below. In the heart of Havenbrook, nestled atop a cliff that seemed to mock the town's struggle, stood the Ward family mansion, its towering spires cutting through the stormy night like a dark silhouette, its windows glowing with a cold, sterile light. Inside, all was still save for the occasional creak of wood and the distant rumble of thunder. There, in the heart of a world that had seen more grandeur than it cared for a family, was slowly coming undone. James Ward, a man who had once commanded boardrooms and dictatorial power, stood at the mansion's front door. His suit was immaculate, though there was a tightness in his jaw that betrayed the calm exterior he so desperately clung to. His mind was elsewhere, caught in the maze of spreadsheets, meetings, and fleeting phone calls that had come to define his life. He hadn't wanted to come home early. He had made no arrangements, no plans, no expectations, but something inside him, something buried so deep he had nearly forgotten it, told him he had to. He had been away for too long, as always, and there was a flicker of doubt gnawing at his insides, a feeling he had long suppressed under the weight of his own ambition. He had no idea what awaited him. Liam, his 10-year-old son, had become a ghost in his life. After the death of his wife Maria in childbirth, the boy was nothing more than a fading image in his memory, once a source of warmth, but now a shadow. James had buried himself in his work, pushing aside the grief that haunted him, abandoning his son to the care of the woman who had promised him solace. Victoria, the woman who had slid into his life with the grace of a serpent, had been everything he had thought he needed. She was beautiful, composed, the perfect wife, the perfect stepmother. At least that's what he told himself. In reality, she was a stranger, a woman with eyes too cold to love, her smile too sharp to trust. But she was there when he wasn't. She was there for Liam when James wasn't. Or so he thought. James walked down the grand hallway, the sound of his polished shoes echoing in the vast emptiness of the house. The mansion with its elegant marble floors and gilded chandeliers felt like a mausoleum rather than a home. The laughter that once filled its walls had faded into silence, and the smell of fresh-baked bread and blooming roses, which had been the heart of his marriage to Maria, now lingered only as a memory. He was coming home to a place that had once been full of life, but now it was just a hollow structure, a monument to everything he had lost and to everything he had neglected. When he reached the living room, he stopped short. There in the corner, sitting on the floor, was Liam. The boy was clutching his torn, stuffed bear, his small body shaking as his shoulders heaved with sobs. His clothes were mismatched, his hair unkempt, but it wasn't the boy's appearance that caught James off guard, it was the sound. The raw, guttural sound of a child's grief. The kind of grief that as a father James had failed to notice. Liam James whispered his voice, breaking the silence of the house like a crack of thunder. Liam's head snapped up, his wide brown eyes locking onto his father's. A flicker of recognition, of fear, of longing crossed his face, before he quickly lowered his gaze. It was as if the boy wasn't sure how to react to the presence of the father who had been absent for so long. His small voice, barely above a whisper, trembled as he spoke. "Please, don't hurt me. Don't hurt my brother anymore." The words hit James like a freight train. He felt his heart seize a knot of panic tightening in his chest as the weight of those words settled into his bones. His mind flashed back to Maria, to the promises he had made to her, to the vow he had taken to protect their family. How had it all gone so wrong? But before he could say anything, Victoria appeared from the shadows, stepping into the room with a cold, calculated smile, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, her red dress sleek and unforgiving. She looked every bit the picture of elegance, the image of the devoted wife and mother. But James knew better. He had known better for months, years even, but had chosen to ignore it to convince himself that everything was fine, that he could fix it later. That he had time. "You're back early, darling," she said, in a voice that was too sweet, too practiced. Her eyes flicked toward Liam, who had now stood up, his arms trembling as he held his bear close to his chest. "I was just taking care of a little discipline. You know how children are, they act out, they misbehave. But I've been doing the best I can." James watched her closely. He could see the shift in her eyes, the subtle hardness beneath the smile. He had seen it before, but it had never bothered him until now. Until the words of his son echoed in his ears. "What did you say to him?" James asked, his voice low but rising with a hint of something darker. "Oh, nothing really," Victoria replied, her tone light, almost too light. "Just that if he continues to misbehave, he'll have to face the consequences." "I told him." "No," James interrupted, his voice hardening as he took a step forward. "I want the truth, Victoria. What's really been going on here?" Victoria's smile faltered just for a second. "James," she said, her voice softening in an instant, "you've been so busy. So caught up in your work. I'm just doing what needs to be done. You've been away for so long. I'm just making sure everything stays in order." But James was no longer listening. His gaze was fixed on Liam, who was standing quietly in the corner, his small body trembling, his eyes too old for a child his age. He had seen that look before, the look of fear that only a child who has been broken can wear. He had failed him. He had failed his son. The storm outside raged on the wind, howling louder, as if in sync with the turmoil in James's heart. He had spent so many years building his empire, so many years focused on the future, that he had neglected the one thing that truly mattered: his family, his son. As the truth settled like an avalanche, James felt the cold realization wash over him. He wasn't just a father who had been absent. He was a father who had allowed the abuse to happen, who had ignored the signs, who had failed to protect the one person who needed him most. Liam James whispered, his voice shaking, "Now I'm so sorry." But Liam didn't respond. He just stood there, his eyes wide, waiting for something, anything from the man who should have been there all along. And in that moment, James understood. The house was more than just a mansion. It was a prison for Liam, a prison for himself, and a prison for the family he had allowed to slip through his fingers. The storm outside raged louder, the thunder booming like a judgment. But inside, the storm had just begun. James stood there, frozen, staring at his son. Liam, who stood motionless in the corner, clutching his bear, as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. His small frame trembled, and his eyes, once bright with curiosity and mischief, were now filled with a quiet despair that pierced James's heart like an icy dagger. It was as if the boy was a shadow of the child He once knew a ghost of the laughter that had once echoed through these halls. The weight of his years of neglect, of his constant escape into the safe confines of his work, suddenly pressed down on James with crushing force. His chest tightened, and his breathing became shallow, as the enormity of the truth long buried came crashing into his consciousness. He had failed Liam utterly and completely. His son had been alone in the storm, and he hadn't even known it. James's eyes flicked toward Victoria, who stood just a few feet away, her smile gone, her posture rigid. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had married in the wake of his wife's death, the one who had promised him stability, was now nothing more than a stranger. Her calm facade had cracked, and in its place stood a cold, calculating figure who in that moment seemed more dangerous than ever. She was a predator, and Liam had been her prey. How had he not seen it sooner? How had he allowed this to happen under his roof? I've tried. James, Victoria said, her voice low, almost pleading, but there was no sincerity in her words. You don't understand. I've had to be both mother and father to him. You were never here. You left me alone with him, and he's a wild child. He doesn't listen. He doesn't respect me. Her words spilled out in a steady stream, like the carefully rehearsed lines of an actor trying to sell a lie. I'm doing what's best for him. He needs discipline. He's broken, and I'm the only one who can fix him. James felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he crushed it down. His emotions were a whirlwind. Grief, guilt, rage, all of it collided in his chest like a tidal wave. He forced himself to look at Victoria. His jaw clenched, his voice steady, but cold. Discipline. He asked each word, feeling like it was being dragged out of him against his will. Is that what you call it? Is that what you call throwing my son around, locking him in a room and bruising him? Victoria's eyes flashed with irritation, the mask slipping for just a moment, revealing something far darker behind it. You don't get it. Do you? She snapped. You've never had to be the one to clean up the mess. You've never had to deal with his problems. He's not like other children. He's not like our child. James's mind reeled as he struggled to make sense of her words. Our child, he repeated the phrase, sounding foreign on his lips. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if she had always seen Liam as a burden, a reminder of the life she could never truly have with him. He had once thought that Victoria was trying to be a mother to Liam, that she had stepped into the role of someone who had passed too soon. But now, with the clarity of a father who was waking from a long slumber, he saw her for what she truly was, a woman who wanted control over him, over his son, over the future. Liam's my son, James, said, his voice growing stronger. He's my responsibility. I'm his father, Victoria, and I'm not going to let you hurt him anymore. Victoria's face twisted into something cold, her expression hardening as she took a step toward him. You think you can just come in here and fix everything? Her voice was sharp, dangerous now, and the venom in her words was palpable. You've been gone for months, James. Do you think that just because you come back for a few days, everything will magically be okay? You don't even know what he's like. You don't know what I've had to deal with. You think this is just about him? The room seemed to grow smaller, the walls closing in around them. James felt the weight of her words pressing on him, but they felt wrong, false. Victoria was trying to spin her narrative, trying to manipulate him once again, but for the first time in a long time he wasn't buying it. The truth had already revealed itself. He saw Liam's tear-streaked face, the bruises on his wrists, the terror in his eyes, and for the first time he saw beyond the lies Victoria had so expertly woven around him. No, James said, his voice rising the air in the room, thick with a new, undeniable certainty. I see it now. I see everything. You've been lying to me, manipulating me, and using my grief as a shield. You've been hurting Liam, and I let it happen. I let it happen because I wasn't here. I wasn't paying attention. But that ends now. You're not going to get away with this." Victoria recoiled, her expression faltering, but she quickly regained her composure, her gaze narrowing with cold calculation. "You think you can take him from me? You think you can just walk in here and take my place? This is my home, James. My life. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly." James said, his voice unwavering. "I understand that I've been an absentee father, that I've put my career before my son, that I've let you manipulate me into believing your lies. But that changes now. Liam will never be alone again. Not while I'm alive." For the first time, he saw a flicker of fear in Victoria's eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there, something primal, something desperate. She knew just as he did that the balance of power in their relationship had shifted. She was no longer in control, and for the first time, James was fully awake. The fog had lifted, and he could see the truth, no matter how ugly it was. Liam hadn't moved. He stood there, his face pale, his small body still trembling, unsure of what was happening. James's heart clenched. This was his son, the boy he had failed, the boy who had been left to suffer in silence, while James played the part of the businessman, the husband, the man who had it all. Liam had been left to navigate a world of fear and uncertainty alone. But not anymore. James stepped forward, kneeling down in front of Liam, who hesitated, as if unsure whether to trust him. But then, slowly, Liam reached out his small hands, trembling, and James wrapped his arms around him. "I'm here," Liam James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I'm here now, and I'm never going to leave you again." The boy clung to him, his body shaking as he buried his face in James's chest. James could feel the weight of Liam's sobs, each one a release of years of fear, pain, and isolation. But now in this moment there was something else, something far more powerful: hope. Hope that together they could rebuild what had been broken, that together they could face whatever lay ahead. Victoria stood in the background watching them, her eyes burning with anger, but also with something else, something darker, something dangerous. James knew that this was only the beginning, that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But for the first time, he was no longer afraid. He had made his choice. He would fight for his son, for Liam, no matter the cost. And with that decision, the storm outside seemed to quiet, the wind slowing, the rain tapering off. Inside the mansion, for the first time in years, the air felt lighter, as if the house itself had exhaled a long-held breath. This was their new beginning, and nothing would stand in their way. As James held his son, Liam, tightly in his arms, he felt an overwhelming sense of guilt and sorrow sweep over him. The boy's small frame shook with quiet sobs, his face pressed into his father's chest, as if trying to erase the pain of years spent in silence. For a moment, James just stood there, letting the gravity of what had just transpired sink in. He had come home expecting to find the same hollow mansion, the same routine of empty luxury and suffocating silence. But what he found instead was a broken child, his child, and a woman who had systematically manipulated and mistreated him. Liam's tears were a release, a purging of all the fear and suffering he had endured. And in that moment, James understood with perfect clarity the depth of his failure. He had been blind to his son's pain, blind to the subtle manipulations of the woman he had trusted, and perhaps most painfully of all, blind to the truth of the home he had created. It had never been a home at all. It was a prison built on the foundation of his ambition and his grief. But now, in the silence that followed the storm of emotions, James made a vow to himself, to his son, and to the memory of Maria. He would never fail Liam again. The storm outside had quieted, But inside the house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. James gently pulled away from his son, his hands shaking slightly as he brushed a lock of Liam's hair from his forehead. "It's over, Liam," he whispered, his voice barely audible but full of conviction. "You're safe now. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'm here." Liam looked up at him, his wide brown eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. It was as if the boy was trying to reconcile the man before him, the father he had longed for, but never truly known, with the man who had failed him so many times before. James could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the way Liam clung to him, as if unsure whether to trust that this promise was real. But James was determined to make it real. "We'll fix this together," James said, his voice firm now, the weight of his fatherly responsibility settling over him. He could feel the years of neglect, of missed opportunities pressing down on him like a mountain. But with every breath, he pushed it back, focusing only on what was in front of him, the boy in his arms, the one person he needed to protect at all costs. Victoria was still standing by the doorway, her arms crossed her eyes, narrowed her lips set in a hard line. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, and yet the tension in the room was palpable. James could almost feel her calculating her mind, working to find a way out of the corner she had painted herself into. He knew that she wouldn't just let this go. She wouldn't relinquish control without a fight. But James was done being manipulated. He had let her control him for far too long, let her feed him lies and promises of love, all while she slowly poisoned his relationship with his son. No more. The realization that his son had been subjected to her cruelty had ignited something inside him, something fierce and unrelenting. "You don't get to do this anymore," James said, his voice cutting through the thick silence like a blade. "You don't get to hurt him. Not while I'm here. Not while I'm his father." Victoria's face flickered with a momentary flash of rage, but it quickly gave way to a controlled, cold smile. "You think you can just waltz in here and make demands?" she asked, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "You've been gone for months, James. You have no idea what's been happening in this house. You've given up your right to make decisions about this family." Her words stung, but James was done listening to her. He had been listening to her for far too long, and all it had gotten him was a fractured family and a son who had suffered. It was time to act. "No," James said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had finally found his backbone. "You don't get to decide that anymore. I'm taking Liam with me. He's coming home with me. And you're not going to hurt him again. Ever." Victoria stepped forward, her heels clicking ominously against the floor as she closed the distance between them. "You're making a mistake," she warned, her voice low and dangerous. "You don't understand what you're doing. You're destroying everything we've built, everything I've worked for." James stood his ground, his chest swelling with an emotion he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Anger. Anger at Victoria. Anger at himself. Anger at the life he had let slip through his fingers. But more than anything, he felt anger for his son, for the boy who had endured so much. This house. This life. James said, his voice rising now, each word more deliberate than the last, was never real. "It's all a lie. I've been living in a fantasy. But not anymore. This," he gestured around the room, "this is not my family. Liam is my family, and I'm going to protect him." The words hit Victoria like a slap. Her face tightened, and for the first time she looked unsure. Her confidence, the icy mask she had worn so well, cracked for just a moment. But it was enough. James could see the fear in her eyes. She knew just as he did that this battle was over. She had no more leverage, no more control. "I'll have you thrown out of here, James," She spat her words venomous. "You can't just take him from me. You can't just walk away from everything we've built." But James was resolute. "We haven't built anything," he said, his voice steady, unshaken. "You've built a prison, and I'm taking Liam out of it." Victoria's eyes flickered with something else, now something darker. She didn't respond at first, but James could feel the storm brewing inside her. He knew she wouldn't go down quietly, but he didn't care. For the first time, he didn't care what she said or did. Liam stirred in his arms, looking up at James, his small hands gripping the fabric of his father's shirt, as if afraid to let go. James lowered his head, meeting his son's eyes, and in that moment he knew with a certainty that burned through him that he would do anything to protect him. "We're leaving," James said, his words simple, but they carried the weight of a decision that would change everything. Liam's face softened just a little, as if something inside him had shifted. The fear was still there, the uncertainty, but it was tinged now with something else, hope. For the first time in years, James saw it, the spark of trust. He had a chance to make things right. Victoria, watching them, clenched her fists, her knuckles white. Her lip curled into a sneer, but James didn't flinch. He stepped toward the door, Liam still in his arms, and as he passed Victoria, he looked at her one last time. "You've lost," he said simply, and with that he walked out of the room, his son in his arms, his heart filled with something that felt like freedom. The house, the mansion, felt different now. It no longer held the weight of a past that had been poisoned by lies and manipulation. It was just a house, a place that had once been a symbol of success, but now stood empty, devoid of warmth. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving only a wet, silent landscape. But James felt something inside him shift. For the first time, he felt free. And for the first time in a long time, so did Liam. The drive from the mansion was quiet. The rain had stopped, but the night sky was still thick with clouds, and the streets were slick with the remnants of the storm. James kept his hands on the wheel, his grip firm and steady, though his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop replaying the events of the night, Victoria's venomous words, the icy finality in her eyes, and the weight of the decision he had just made. For the first time in years, James was fully awake to the truth of his life. He had let work, ambition, and grief shape his existence. He had built an empire of glass and steel, but in doing so, he had neglected the one thing that truly mattered: his son. As the city's lights faded behind them, the hum of the car's engine was the only sound in the air. Liam sat beside him in the passenger seat. His small body curled slightly inwards. His eyes focused on the road ahead, but his mind clearly elsewhere. James could feel the weight of his son's silence, the unspoken question lingering between them. Is it really over? James glanced over at Liam, who was fidgeting with the hem of his coat, his fingers pulling and tugging at the fabric as if trying to distract himself from the fear and uncertainty he must have been feeling. For a moment, James thought about asking him how he was feeling, but he stopped himself. What could he say? How could he possibly explain all that had just happened? He had spent so long avoiding the truth, so long burying his emotions under the weight of his success, that he didn't even know where to begin. He wasn't sure how to fix the pieces of the broken relationship he had with his son. But one thing was clear: he had to try. Liam, James said quietly, his voice soft and tentative, "I know this has been a lot. And I know things haven't been easy for you. But I want you to know that I'm here now. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to be here for you." Liam didn't respond at first. James could feel the hesitation in the air, the weight of years of neglect and fear hanging between them. But after a few moments, Liam finally turned his head, his eyes meeting his father's, and James saw something there, something that made his heart ache with both sadness and hope. There was uncertainty. Yes, but there was also something else, the faintest glimmer of trust. I don't know what's going to happen next. Dad. Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. His words were thick with emotion, and James could hear the tremor in them. I don't know if I can believe you. You've been gone so long. I don't know if you can fix it. James's throat tightened. He had expected this, had known that it would take time. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, especially after everything Liam had been through. But hearing the words fall from his son's lips was still like a knife to the chest. He had failed him, failed to be the father Liam needed. And now, after everything, all he could do was try to make it right, try to show Liam that he could be the father he had promised to be all those years ago. I understand, Liam, James said, his voice rough with emotion. I've been a terrible father. I know that. I've let you down and I can't change the past. But I swear to you I'm going to do better. I'm not going anywhere this time. I'm going to be here every step of the way, and I'll never let anyone hurt you again. Liam's eyes searched his father's face, as if trying to read between the lines of his words, trying to find some trace of the man he had always longed for. James could feel the weight of the silence between them, the unspoken bond that had always existed, but had been fractured by time and neglect. But in this moment, as the car glided silently through the streets, James felt a shift, a change that was small but significant. He could feel the walls between him and his son starting to crumble bit by bit. I'm scared, Liam admitted, his voice small but honest. I'm scared that you'll leave again, that this will just be another one of your promises that you can't keep. James's heart sank. The vulnerability in his son's voice was a reminder of how much damage he had caused by being absent, by choosing everything else over his family. How could he have let it get to this point? How could he have let Liam feel so alone? I won't leave Liam. James said, his voice steady and filled with resolve. I'm not going anywhere. I know I've made mistakes, but I promise you I'm going to be here from now on. We'll figure this out together. I'm not just your father in name. I'm going to be your father in every way. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Liam nodded slowly, his eyes still filled with uncertainty, but there was something else there too, a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For the first time in years, James felt like maybe they could start over. They could rebuild. The car continued down the quiet road, the soft hum of the engine providing a sense of calm in the midst of the storm they had just weathered. James couldn't help but wonder what their future held. He knew there would be challenges ahead. He knew there would be days when things felt impossible, when the weight of the past threatened to pull them both under. But he was determined. He had spent so many years running from the pain, running from the responsibility he had ignored, that he had forgotten the simple truth: his family was everything. And no matter what it took, he would fight for them. As they pulled into the driveway of their new home, a modest house nestled in the hills outside of town, James felt a sense of relief wash over him. This place wasn't a mansion, wasn't a symbol of success or wealth, but it was theirs. It was a fresh start, a place where he could make good on his promises, a place where Liam could finally feel safe. We're home, James said softly, glancing over at Liam, who was still staring out the window, his face pale in the glow of the streetlights. This is our new home, just you and me. Liam nodded, his expression unreadable, but for the first time since they'd left the mansion, there was a small, cautious smile tugging at the corner of his lips. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was progress, and progress, James realized, was all they needed right now. They both stepped out of the car, and as James walked around to Liam's side, he extended his hand to his son. For a moment Liam hesitated, his eyes flicking from his father's outstretched hand to the house in front of them. But then with a quiet sigh, he reached out and took it. Together, father and son walked into their new life, one step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, the weight of the world didn't feel quite as heavy. The house, though small and simple, felt like a new beginning. The walls were bare, the floors cold, but James could already see the potential. It wasn't about the grandeur or the luxury. It was about the memories they would create, the moments they would share. There would be no more long business trips, no more missed birthdays or forgotten promises. This was their chance to start over. Liam, still unsure but willing to try, stood at the threshold of the living room, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. "You okay?" James asked, stepping up beside him. Liam nodded, though his eyes still held the uncertainty of a boy who had been let down too many times. "Yeah, I think so." James squeezed his son's shoulder gently, offering a smile. "It's going to take time. But we're going to do this together." Liam gave a faint nod. It was a start, a fragile, tentative start, but it was a start. As James looked around the room, he knew the road ahead would be difficult. There would be days when it felt impossible, days when the past threatened to come crashing down. But for the first time in years, he felt ready to face it. Ready to fight for his son, to make up for lost time, and to prove that family, not success, was the most important thing in life. And with that, James took a deep breath, knowing that he was exactly where he needed to be, home, with his son beginning again. The days following their arrival at the new house were quieter than James had anticipated. The sounds of the city, the hum of the office, and the constant stream of meetings that had once filled his life were now distant echoes replaced by an unfamiliar stillness that hung in the air like a weight. The house, with its simple walls and sparse furniture, was both a sanctuary and a reminder of the years he had wasted. He had stepped away from his fast-paced, high-stakes world to take on the more difficult and less glamorous role of fatherhood. And yet in this stillness, James found that he was also beginning to rediscover himself. The first week was nothing short of awkward. James had no idea where to begin, how to navigate the landmine that was his relationship with Liam. The boy, though physically safe, was emotionally fragile, and James couldn't help but feel like he was walking on eggshells. Every glance, every word felt weighted with the years of neglect and emotional distance that had defined their relationship. James would catch Liam staring at him in moments of quiet, his expression unreadable, like he was trying to figure out whether this version of his father, this new present man, was real. There were no promises, no distractions. It was just James and Liam in a house that didn't yet feel like a home. But they were trying. One afternoon, as the sun filtered softly through the half-closed blinds, James watched Liam as he sat at the kitchen table, a drawing pad spread in front of him. The boy had been scribbling for hours, a concentrated look on his face. His brow furrowed as his small hand moved quickly across the page. James leaned against the counter, watching his son, but unsure of what to say. They hadn't had many conversations yet, but this, the quiet of the house, felt like the first real connection they'd had since they left the mansion behind. After a few moments, Liam set down his pencil and turned the pad toward his father. "Look, Dad," he said softly, his voice still hesitant, but there was a slight excitement in his tone. James walked over, slowly kneeling beside Liam's chair. The drawing was a simple sketch of a house, small and unassuming, with crooked lines and uneven windows. At the center of it was a tree, drawn with exaggerated curves, its branches reaching far into the sky. Liam had drawn the tree in such a way that it almost seemed to be protecting the house, like it was sheltering it from the world. For a moment, James was taken aback by the tenderness of the image. It was a small house, The kind they could build together, the kind that didn't need to be perfect to be meaningful. This is really good," James said, surprised by the depth of emotion that surged through him. He placed his hand gently on Liam's shoulder, and for the first time in days the boy didn't pull away. Instead, he looked at James with a mixture of curiosity and hope, as if waiting for more, waiting to see whether his father would follow through on the promise he had made to him, the promise to be there. I want to make a tree like that in the backyard," Liam said quietly, his eyes still fixed on the drawing. "I want it to be real so we can see it every day, a tree that helps the house feel safe. Like we're safe here." James nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. He didn't know what had sparked this sudden openness from Liam, but he wasn't about to let it slip away. "That sounds like a great idea," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think we can make that happen. We'll plant that tree together. It'll be ours. Just like this house. Just like everything we're building here." Liam's eyes softened, and for the first time since they arrived at the house, James saw a glimmer of something else, something that resembled trust. It wasn't a full smile, but it was enough to let James know that maybe his son was starting to believe in him again. The road to rebuilding their relationship was long, but this moment was a start. It was a seed. And like the tree in Liam's drawing, it would take time to grow. But if they nurtured it together, it could become something strong, something that would last. Over the next few weeks, the two of them worked together to transform the backyard into something more than just a plot of land behind the house. They cleared away the weeds, tilled the soil, and eventually planted a young sapling, the same kind of tree Liam had drawn. Though this one was smaller, its roots not yet strong enough to reach the sky. But James saw the symbolism in it. This was more than just a tree. It was a sign of new beginnings of their willingness to work together to put down roots in a place that could be called home. As the tree grew, so did their bond. James began to understand the kind of father he needed to be. He stopped trying to fix everything all at once and started focusing on the small moments, the moments that Liam needed him most. He didn't need to be a perfect father. He just needed to be there consistently every day. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about being present. And in doing so, he began to understand Liam's world better. The first time they had dinner together at the kitchen table, the silence was awkward. There was no rushing to fill the empty spaces with words, no pretending to be something they weren't. James had never realized how much noise he had been making in his life, how much he had been avoiding the real conversations. This, the quiet dinner, the shared space between father and son, was a first. It felt uncomfortable at first, but as the days went on, it started to feel more natural. There was a new rhythm to their life now, one that was slow and steady, one that didn't rely on distractions. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. And that was more than James had ever expected. One evening after dinner, Liam came to him, his eyes bright. "Can we go outside and check on the tree? I think it's growing faster than I thought." James smiled and nodded. They stepped out into the cool night air, the sky now dotted with stars, and walked to the backyard, where the sapling stood small but determined. The first few leaves had begun to sprout, fragile but full of promise. "Look at it," Liam said, his voice filled with wonder. "It's growing. It's already getting bigger." James looked at the tree, then at his son, and in that moment he saw the change in both of them. The tree, like their relationship, was a work in progress, but it was growing. Slowly, steadily, it was becoming something more than just a sapling. It was becoming a symbol of the resilience they shared, the shared effort to build something strong, something real. James put his arm around Liam's shoulders, pulling him close. "It's growing," James said, his voice soft but full of meaning. "And so are we." Liam didn't say anything, but the way he leaned into his father told James everything he needed to know. They were on the path to healing, to rebuilding. They still had a long way to go, but this was a start. The tree, like their bond, was just beginning. And every day, it would grow stronger. As they stood together in the quiet night, James realized that this was the life he had been searching for all along. It wasn't the mansion, the wealth, or the success. It was the simple, honest moments, the shared experiences of rebuilding something that had been broken. And in this quiet, growing moment with his son, he understood that he had finally found what truly mattered. The future might still be uncertain, but as long as they were together, as long as they had each other, they could face whatever came next. The tree would grow, their bond would grow, and they would too, step by step. In the stillness of that moment, surrounded by the quiet sounds of the night, James felt something deep and profound settle in his chest. This was what it meant to be a father. To protect, to nurture, to be there through every storm, every challenge. And as Liam looked up at him, their hands resting on the tree's small trunk, James knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where they would grow together stronger and more resilient than before. And for the first time in years, James felt at peace. The journey of James and Liam offers a powerful lesson about the importance of presence vulnerability and the slow, steady process of rebuilding relationships. In the fast-paced world that so many of us live in, it's easy to lose sight of what truly matters: our connections with the people who matter most. James spent years building a life based on achievement status and success, yet he neglected the most important thing: his role as a father. His absence from Liam's life, though driven by good intentions, providing a comfortable life for his family, left emotional scars that could only be healed by his presence. The story reminds us that being physically present isn't enough. Emotional presence is key. The lesson here is clear relationships, especially with our children, require active participation. We can't just show up when it's convenient. We have to be willing to show up consistently in the quiet moments, in the small actions, and most importantly, in the moments when it feels hardest to connect. James learned that real growth, whether in a tree, a family, or any relationship, doesn't happen overnight. It requires patience, understanding, and the willingness to face the mistakes of the past without running from them. Through his effort to rebuild his relationship with Liam, James understood that love isn't just about big gestures. It's about being there every day, doing the little things that make a big difference over time. This same principle applies to all of us, whether it's a family member, a friend, or even a colleague. The key to meaningful relationships lies in the time and care we invest in them. In practice, this lesson urges us to prioritize quality over quantity. It might not be about grand moments or perfect solutions. It's about the consistency of showing up, checking in, and being vulnerable enough to acknowledge our flaws. Think about the relationships in your life. Are there any that need more of your time and attention? Maybe it's a conversation you've been putting off, or simply showing up to listen and be present even when it feels uncomfortable. Just as James and Liam started their healing journey with small, simple actions like planting a tree together, we can begin taking steps to rebuild trust and connection with those around us. It's not about perfection. It's about the willingness to take that first step, even when it feels uncertain. I want to encourage you, the reader, to reflect on this. Are there relationships in your life that could benefit from more of your emotional presence? Think about the small actions you can take not in the distant future, but right now. A conversation, an apology, a simple act of kindness. Sometimes the smallest steps lead to the biggest changes. Thank you for taking the time to read this story and to reflect on the powerful message it carries. I hope that you found it as meaningful as I did. Relationships are a lifelong journey, and it's never too late to begin taking the steps that will nurture and strengthen them. Please feel free to share your thoughts, reflections, or any personal experiences you might have. I would love to hear how this lesson resonates with you. Thank you again, and remember that the most important things in life are often the simplest: showing up, being present, and putting in the work to nurture what truly matters.